Hi guys, and welcome to what will hopefully be the first of many videos on my YouTube channel. My name is Chris Byrne, and today we're going to be talking about something which is fast becoming an old debate in guitar playing, and that is of course analog versus digital guitar gear. So normally at this point, you may be expecting me to take some form of valve amp and then comparing it to a digital copy. Say for example, taking a Marshall Plexi and then seeing how well the profile of the same amp in a Kemper stacks up next to it. That's not really the aim of this video. There's already plenty of people on YouTube who are way more talented at audio engineering than I am that have already done this, and they've already proven how close digital gear is these days to the real deal. The Andertons video where they run their amps through a Kemper, or a BM Assard's video where he runs his own amps through a Quad Cortex are very good examples of this. The aim of this video is more to talk about them as creative tools, what do they like to tour with, and ultimately to figure out which of these is actually the right choice for you as a guitar player. As for myself, I'm fairly experienced in using both. Throughout the years, I've had various amps in my collection, including things like a Diesel VH4, a Marshall JVM, and an EVH 5150, just to name a few. On the digital side of things, for a long time, I was actually using a Line 6 Helix. And that was the other thing I wanted to explore in this video, the reasons why people switch from analog to digital, but also from digital back to analog. First of all, let's talk about them as creative tools, starting with the digital side. And I'll be using my Helix as an example of this. The great thing with digital is if you have a sound in your head, the chances are in the digital world you can very easily create it in the tool that you're using. So for example, with the Helix, let's say you've got an idea for starting off with, say, a crunchy rock riff. You just simply load up a model of an amp like a Marshall Plexi and you're pretty much ready to go. Let's say you want to add some extra dirt to your tone. You can add a treble booster. Let's say you want to add some modulation. You can put in a phaser or say a flanger. Let's say you want to add some delay and reverb. Again, you just load up that particular effect in the unit and again, you're ready to go. Not only that, but you can very easily swap the order of these things. You just select it and you can move it in the chain. So you can experiment with, say, how delay and reverb sounds in the front of an amp versus in the amp's effects loop, for example. In theory, this means you have an unlimited canvas in order to create the sound that you have in your head. A good example of this is Devin Townsend's rig rundown, which he did recently. He speaks about the Axe effects and what it means for him as a creative tool, how it allows him to create the sounds that he has in his head, and also how it sits for him, particularly in a band mix. The guitar isn't the primary focus for him after all, it's part of a composition. Guthrie Govan's rig rundown, for example, has him crossfading between two patches that he's created, something in the analog world which would be much more difficult. So let's talk about creating your sound with analog gear. Normally with a valve rig or any kind of amp rig that you're using, you're normally talking about a system which is entirely modular. So you'll have different guitar amps on the market, different pedals on the market, and putting these things together can sometimes mean you're creating a rig which can feel very unique to yourself. The first time I discovered this actually was I was playing through my friend's rig where he simply had a Marshall JCM 800 and about 6 or 7 pedals on his board. You know, the typical effects you would expect to see: a phaser, a wah pedal, a fuzz pedal, an octave pedal. Now, the reason that I really like the system and why I ended up moving to using pedals myself was I actually found this to be a very inspiring and creative tool for me. Being able to have a pedal, mess with the sound of it, change the order of it physically was something that I found more engaging and more creative as a guitar player compared to what can sometimes be option paralysis when you're scrolling through menus in a digital system like a Kemper or an XFX or a Helix, for example. That's not to say that's going to be the same for everyone, of course. Everyone's got different ways in which their mind works in terms of creating music. It was just something that I noticed in myself, that analog gear was actually easier for me to get to the end result of what I wanted from my guitar sound. So unfortunately, I can't actually show you this board because my friend no longer has it. What I can say, however, is another good example is actually Tom Morello's board. If you look on there, there's not really a lot going on. There's a couple of delay pedals and a whammy pedal, for example, but he uses the tools that he has and gets the most out of them in order to create a sound which is very distinctly Tom Morello. John Mayer actually spoke about this in the video at the launch of the Silver Sky, where he spoke about taking a guitar, plugging it into an amp, and then using those two pieces of gear to find your own sounds. And honestly, I think there is something in this because this quote has always stuck with me. I think it's very important for guitar players to always be trying to be the best version of themselves and finding what makes them unique and what they can always do to improve that. And I think that also extends to your gear choices too. Because if you look at the market of what's available and then you can use that to create something which is unique to yourself, this is something that can actually help you stand out as a guitar player. So let's talk about what they're like to tour with, and honestly, analog can often fall short compared to its digital counterparts. So because you're dealing with rigs which are very modular, more often than not you can have more individual things that can go wrong. So for example, your valve amp can obviously blow a valve, your pedal board can have a foot switch go wrong or a cable go wrong. There's more individual things that can go wrong, so troubleshooting these things can also present a potential nightmare. This being said, however, because it's modular, if one individual piece of it goes wrong, it can actually mean it's a relatively simple thing to fix. So for example, my wah pedal had a switch go and I just simply put a new foot switch in. I literally just ordered the part from the shop, soldered it in myself, and I was ready to go. There's also to consider the weight factor. More often than not, valve amps are incredibly heavy pieces of equipment, and pedal boards, depending on how big they are, can also present the same problem. You're dealing with something which is heavy and can take up a lot of space, and that's something to factor depending on if you're taking these things in a van or a car, for example. So moving over to digital, and honestly the advantages speak for themselves, and it's probably why you see most people in the touring world switching to using digital. These rigs are normally a lot lighter, they're a lot more compact, especially if you're using it as not only your amp simulation but also your effects simulation as well. It just means you've got an all-in-one package which you can very easily take with you. In fact, I used to do this. I used to just take my Helix and my Seymour Duncan Power Stage to gigs, plug it into the cab that was there, and I was ready to go. And it, like, for 5 or 10 minute changeovers, it was an absolute lifesaver sometimes. This being said, however, digital gear is of course not completely immune to going wrong, and when it does go wrong, it can actually present to you more problems. For example, with a Kemper, if that develops a fault, you pretty much have to send that back to Kemper in order to get it fixed. I experienced something similar with my Helix when the foot switches started going faulty. I tried contacting line 6 to get it fixed, and they said I had to go through their repair center. When I contacted the repair center, they said I had to go to line 6 to get it fixed. So the long story short is, in my cupboard is still a Helix with dodgy foot switches, which from a touring perspective is obviously not all that useful. As for myself, whilst I was using a digital rig for a couple of years, I ended up going back to using analog. The reason for this is basically just because I like using analog gear. I find it helps me feel the most creative. I feel like it always gives me things to mess with, and it also keeps me interested in guitar gear in general. And also as a result of that, it keeps me playing more. And that's the ultimate end of all of this, is picking the rig which helps you play the most, the one that gets you focused the most on guitar playing. It shouldn't just be anyone on the internet telling you you should just use digital gear because it's so close now that it doesn't make a difference, or you should use analog gear just because digital gear will never catch up to it. That's not really the point of this video. The point is to use the gear that inspires you the most to play guitar and the most to write music. Anyway, that's all from me. Thank you so much for watching, and hopefully you enjoyed the video. You can, of course, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. I want to hear your thoughts on this topic as well, if you want to leave something in the comments below. If you liked the video, of course, please feel free to give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, of course, leave it a thumbs down, and hopefully I'll see you on the next one, okay? Thank you.